The compiler output line on my 34-inch monitor flashed a single, beautiful word: success. Below it, the system statistics populated in real time. The Aegis distributed architecture was now running at a 47.3% optimization leap. The bottleneck that had plagued our AI engine for 6 months was gone. I had rewritten the core memory allocation algorithms from scratch, bypassing the hardware limitations that our competitors said were insurmountable. I leaned back in my leather chair, rubbing my temples. My eyes burned. A dull, rhythmic throb pulsed behind my forehead. I checked the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 2:14 a.m. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Nexus Technologies penthouse office, San Francisco was a dark canvas slashed with the neon blues and golds of the financial district. We were on the 32nd floor. 3 years ago, we were in a damp garage in South San Francisco, smelling of stale coffee and damp cardboard. Now, we were 24 hours away from the opening bell on NASDAQ. A $3 billion valuation. The darling of Silicon Valley. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, its vibration loud in the empty office. It was Samantha. Still at the office? Go home and get some sleep. We have the Sequoia team at 9. Big day. I typed back. Just finished the Aegis patch. It's perfect. Go to sleep yourself. See you in the morning. I hit send. The status changed to read almost instantly. No bubble appeared. No follow-up. Just the cold blue check marks. I stood up, stretching my back, and caught my reflection in the dark glass. I looked 34 going on 45. The gray hairs near my temples were becoming a permanent zip code, and the dark circles under my eyes looked like bruises. But I didn't care. We had built this. From nothing. When Sam found me 3 years ago, I was a senior architect at Google, buried under 3 layers of middle management, watching my best ideas get strangled by corporate red tape. She had walked into a Blue Bottle Coffee on King Street, wearing a faded denim jacket and holding a pitch deck that was mostly blank pages and raw ambition. I don't need another coder, Brandon, she had told me, her green eyes locking onto mine with a ferocity that made my throat dry. I need a partner. I have the network and the strategy. You have the brain. Let's build something that actually changes the paradigm. She was recovering from a brutal breakup with Julian Reed, a Wall Street wunderkind who had dumped her to marry a hedge fund heiress. She was thin, sleep-deprived, and fueled entirely by spite and caffeine. I fell in love with that fire. I sold my Palo Alto condo, emptied my 401k, and poured every cent into Nexus. We slept on folding cots in the office during our Series A. When we got married a year ago at City Hall, Marcus Zhao, our CFO, was the only witness. We celebrated with $20 burgers and cheap champagne. To the code, Sam had whispered that night, her head resting on my shoulder. And to us, no matter how big this gets, it's always you and me against the world. Always, I had said. My phone buzzed again, shattering the memory. It was an email notification. Sender, Marcus Zhao. Subject, urgent, pre-IPO final equity ledger for signature. I opened the attached PDF, scrolling down past the legal boilerplate to the shareholder distribution table. I expected to see the split we had locked in during our seed round. 45% for Samantha, 45% for me, and 10% reserved for the employee option pool. Instead, the numbers stared back at me like an insult. Samantha Vance, 42.7%. Brandon Carter, 31.2%. Institutional investors option pool, 26.1%. I stared at the 31.2%. The math didn't work. Even with the dilution from our Series B, my share should have been at least 38%. Samantha's share, however, had barely nudged. I hit Marcus's direct line. It rang 7 times before he picked up. The background noise was loud, clinking glasses, laughter, the low hum of an upscale restaurant. Marcus, why the hell is my equity at 31%? The noise on the other end died down slightly, followed by the sound of a door closing. Marcus had stepped out. Brandon, hey, you're still up? His voice was tight, stripped of its usual easygoing warmth. Don't dodge the question, Marcus. I'm looking at the final ledger. My technical equity is short by nearly 7 points. Where did it go? A long pause. I could hear him taking a slow breath through his nose. Samantha directed the adjustment last week. She did what? We have a founder agreement, Marcus. It's a 45 split of the core common stock. She brought in an outside valuation firm, Brandon. They, they restructured the contribution metrics. The ruling was that your initial cash injection was matched by her sweat equity during the first 18 months of regulatory compliance. The board voted to reallocate your technical shares into an incentive option pool. It's vested over 5 years. I felt a cold drop in my stomach, like an elevator cable snapping. An incentive pool? I wrote the entire code base. I own the patents. I know, Brandon. I know. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. But the board agreed. They felt a 5-year golden handcuff was necessary to guarantee your long-term commitment post-IPO. Investors don't like keyman risk. The board agreed? What board meeting? I'm a board member, Marcus. I didn't get an invite. It was a special session. Last Thursday, Samantha said you were in the middle of the Aegis sprint and explicitly asked not to be disturbed by administrative overhead. She signed the waiver on your behalf as your spouse. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. She signed it. Brandon, look, don't blow this up now. We're 24 hours from the bell. Any internal dispute, any whiff of founder litigation, and the SEC will halt the listing. The underwriters will pull out. We'll be dead in the water. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before he could reply. I stood in the center of the dark office, my hands trembling slightly. The silence of the room was suddenly suffocating. My laptop screen blinked. A new email. Sender, Sarah Jenkins, Executive Assistant to the CEO. Subject, Sequoia Capital Due Diligence Deck, Final Version. I opened the attachment. I bypassed the financial projections and went straight to the team slide. There was Samantha's headshot at the top. Samantha Vance, Chief Executive Officer co-founder. Below her were 3 VPs. And then, in the third row, in a smaller box with a gray border, Brandon Carter, Chief Technical Advisor. Not CTO, not co-founder. Advisor. A title you give to a retired professor or a consultant you pay by the hour. A title that meant I could be locked out of the building tomorrow morning and the SEC wouldn't even require a disclosure filing. I sat back down. The trembling in my hands stopped, replaced by a strange, heavy stillness. I inserted a secure, encrypted flash drive into my laptop's USB port. I opened our private repository. With 10 keystrokes, I initiated a complete, bit-by-bit backup of the Aegis core engine, the proprietary licensing agreements, and every line of code I had written over the past 3 years. Then, I opened a second, hidden directory. It was a file I had started 6 months ago, purely out of my habit of keeping clean logs. It contained every internal expense report, every wire transfer to offshore shell companies Samantha had authorized, and the private correspondence between her and several third-party software vendors. I had ignored the red flags back then, telling myself it was just aggressive startup accounting. Now, I looked at the data with very different eyes. I dragged the folder onto the drive. The progress bar crept slowly to 100%. I pulled the drive out, slipped it into my inner jacket pocket, and closed my laptop. The glass-walled boardroom of Nexus Technologies smelled of high-end catering and nervous sweat. By 8:55 a.m., the table was lined with $7 lattes and bound copies of our financial projections. Samantha stood at the head of the table, adjusting the lapels of her Chanel blazer. She looked like $1 million, or, more accurately, $3 billion. Her smile was practiced, her posture immaculate. When I walked in and took a seat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her eyes swept over me. She frowned slightly at my wrinkled button-down and the dark circles under my eyes, but she didn't say a word. She just turned back to her presentation deck. At exactly 9 a.m., Donald Warren, the senior managing partner at Sequoia Capital, walked in with 3 junior analysts in tow. Donald was a Silicon Valley kingmaker, a man whose nod could mint billionaires or crush startups overnight. Donald, thanks for making the time, Samantha said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand and an easy, magnetic laugh. I know how busy your week is. For the hottest IPO of the quarter? I'll always make time, Samantha, Donald replied, giving her a firm handshake before sliding into the leather chair directly opposite her. He glanced down the table and nodded at me. Brandon, good to see you outside of GitHub. Good to see you, Donald, I said. Samantha took her cue and clicked the remote. The projector flared to life, casting a blue glow over the room. Let's skip the high-level fluff and get straight to why Nexus is going to dominate the market, Samantha began, her voice smooth and commanding. She walked through the customer acquisition metrics, the projected enterprise revenue, and our 3-year scaling strategy. Her delivery was flawless. Every slide was a masterpiece of corporate optimism. Donald listened, chin resting on his hand, occasionally nodding as his analysts scribbled notes. 30 minutes in, he raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "This is all very clean, Samantha," Donald said, leaning forward. "But I didn't come here for a sales pitch. I can read a prospectus. Let's talk about the moat. Your competitors are pouring hundreds of millions into proprietary hardware to bypass the memory wall bottleneck. You're claiming Nexus did it purely through software. How?" Samantha's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. She glanced at the screen, then turned her eyes to me. "That would be our proprietary Aegis engine," she said, her tone smooth but her eyes signaling a warning. "Our chief technical advisor, Brandon, can give you the high-level overview." "I don't want the high-level overview, Samantha," Donald said, turning his chair directly toward me. "I want the architecture. Brandon, how did you solve the latency issue in multi-node distribution without hardware acceleration?" I stood up, stepping past Samantha to the whiteboard. I didn't look at her. I picked up a black marker. "We didn't bypass the hardware," I said, drawing a 3-tier block diagram on the glass. "We virtualized the memory register at the kernel level. Aegis uses a dynamic, 3-tier cache allocation algorithm. Instead of waiting for the physical bus to clear, the software predicts the next 4 execution threads and pre-allocates memory addresses in parallel." Donald's analysts stopped typing. Donald himself sat up straighter. "And the cache coherence?" Donald asked, his eyes narrowing. "How do you prevent data corruption across 32 nodes?" "We don't use standard snooping protocols," I replied, writing out 3 lines of pseudocode on the board. I built a decentralized consensus layer directly into the compiler. The nodes don't negotiate. They execute based on a precompiled state machine. Latency drops from 80 milliseconds to less than 4. For the next 20 minutes, the room belonged to me. I tore down the technical barriers, explained the patent wall I had built around the Aegis compiler, and laid out exactly why our software made $10,000 NVIDIA chips obsolete. When I finished, I capped the marker. The room was dead silent. Donald stared at the board for a long moment, then slowly began to clap. His analysts joined in. "Brilliant," Donald said, looking back at Samantha. "Samantha, you've got a hell of a business model, but Brandon is the engine under the hood. Having a founder with this kind of technical depth is the best insurance policy a VC could ask for." Samantha's smile was back, though it looked painted on. "Absolutely, Donald. Brandon is the heart of our technology." After the meeting wrapped and the Sequoia team filed out, Donald lingered behind. He shook my hand, sliding a heavy matte black business card into my palm. "Great work today, Brandon," Donald murmured, low enough that his analysts couldn't hear. "If you ever decide you're tired of building other people's companies, call my private line. I'll back whatever you write next." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind Donald, the temperature in the room plummeted. Samantha turned on me, her eyes blazing. "What the hell was that, Brandon?" "What was what?" I answered his questions. "You hijacked my meeting." She threw her presentation remote onto the table. It clattered against a coffee cup. "You went completely off script. We agreed you would keep it high level. You practically gave him the blueprint. He's writing a $50 million check for the IPO stabilization fund, Sam. He doesn't want marketing speak. He wanted to know if the tech was real. I proved it is. I decide what we prove to investors." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "You're a technical advisor, Brandon. Act like it. You don't get to parade around like you run this company." I looked down at her, the anger inside me cold and steady. "Is that why you cut my equity to 31%, Sam? Because you wanted to make sure I knew my place?" Samantha froze. The outrage on her face cracked, just for a second, revealing the cold calculation underneath. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look surprised that I knew. "Marcus told you," she said, crossing her arms. "It doesn't matter who told me. We signed an agreement, Sam. 45. We built this together. I sold my house. I put every line of code into this company. And I put every drop of blood into making sure people actually cared about your code." Samantha snapped, her voice rising. "Do you think we'd be 24 hours from NASDAQ if you were running things? You'd still be tweaking algorithms in a garage, waiting for the perfect build. I secured the funding. I handled the regulators. I built the brand. So you decided to steal my shares? I reallocated them, she said coldly, walking back to her desk and picking up her leather bag. To protect the company. The board agreed you are a flight risk. You're unstable, Brandon. You have no business sense. A 5-year vest is standard for key technical staff. Staff? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I'm a founder. Not anymore, she said, her voice dropping to a chilling level of calm. And honestly, it's better we do this clean. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a thick, navy blue folder, and slid it across the mahogany table toward me. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." I didn't pick it up. I just looked at it, then up at her. What is this? It's over, Brandon. Our marriage, this partnership. All of it. Why? My voice was barely a whisper. Even though I had seen the signs, the physical reality of the document felt like a physical blow. Because I asked about the equity? No, Samantha said, her expression entirely devoid of remorse. Because Julian is back. The name felt like a splash of ice water. Julian Reed. Her ex. The Wall Street hotshot who had left her broken 3 years ago. He's divorced, she continued, her voice softening in a way she had never used with me in over a year. He reached out last month. He's back in San Francisco, and we've been talking. I never stopped loving him, Brandon. These past 3 years, you were what I needed to survive. You were the genius who could build the ladder I needed to climb. I'll always be grateful for that. But I don't love you. She stepped back toward the door, her hand resting on the handle. Julian is joining the company, she said, delivered as a casual afterthought. He's going to manage our post-IPO strategy. Sign the papers, Brandon. Take your 31%, take your 5-year vest, and let's keep this quiet until after the bell tomorrow. Don't ruin this for both of us. She opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the empty, silent boardroom. The board meeting was set for Thursday afternoon, less than 20 hours before we were scheduled to ring the opening bell at NASDAQ. When I walked into the main boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with a calculated, superficial warmth. The 3 institutional investor reps, Chun from Horizon Capital and 2 others representing the Series B syndicate, were already huddled in the corner, laughing at something on a tablet. Marcus Zhao sat near the window, his head down, furiously typing on his phone. He wouldn't look up to meet my eyes. And there, sitting in my usual seat next to Samantha, was Julian Reed. He looked exactly like the Wall Street caricatures I'd spent my career avoiding. A tailored Tom Ford suit, a silver Audemars Piguet Royal Oak glinting on his wrist, and a perfectly symmetrical, white-toothed smile that had probably been negotiated by a public relations firm. "Ah, you must be Brandon," Julian said, standing up and extending his hand before Samantha could even make the introductions. "I've heard so much about you. The genius in the basement. Fantastic work on the Aegis engine. Truly." I ignored his hand, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table and sitting down. "Who let the suit in?" Julian's smile didn't falter. It just hardened around the edges. He sat back down, smoothing his tie. Straight to the point. "I like that. Technical minds don't waste time on pleasantries. Let's get started," Samantha said, tapping her pen on the table to draw the room's attention. Her voice was crisp, entirely stripped of the emotion from our encounter the previous day. "This is a special pre-IPO board session to finalize our executive alignment. First on the agenda is the formal appointment of Julian Reed as our Chief Strategic Officer." "Hold on," I said, leaning forward. "The CSO position requires a unanimous board vote. Last I checked, I still hold a seat, and I didn't vote on this. The board held a proxy vote last night." Brandon, Chun from Horizon Capital, spoke up, his tone dismissive. "Since Samantha holds your spousal voting proxy under the current corporate bylaws, and the Series B syndicate voted in block, the resolution passed 5-1. Julian's appointment is already filed with the SEC as a post-effective amendment. It's about market positioning," Brandon, Samantha added, her green eyes locking onto mine with absolute indifference. Julian spent 8 years at Goldman Sachs leading tech IPOs. The underwriters are ecstatic about his involvement. His presence alone is projected to bump our opening day valuation by another $400 million. "He's a vulture who got kicked out of his last fund for insider speculation," I said, looking directly at Julian. "He doesn't know the difference between a compiler and a toaster. What's his actual strategy?" Pump the stock, dump his options, and leave us with a shell? Julian chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by a child. Brandon, you're brilliant with code, but you clearly don't understand how the street works. Valuation isn't built on lines of software. It's built on narrative. You built a great engine. My job is to sell the car. And frankly, the market prefers a driver who knows how to navigate a corner. Which brings us to item number 2, Samantha said, sliding a new set of bound documents across the table. One landed in front of me. The operational restructuring of the engineering department. I flipped to the first page. The title was clear: Resolution to terminate technical advisory status and reassign Brandon Carter to honorary chairman of the technical committee. Honorary chairman, I read aloud. No direct reports. No veto power over architecture. No access to the production repository. You're locking me out of my own system. It's a standard optimization, Brandon, Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. Investors get nervous when a single engineer has root access to a $3 billion platform. If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, the company shouldn't stop running. We need to transition the Aegis IP into a standardized corporate asset. You'll still get your compensation. You'll still have a beautiful office. You just won't have the keys anymore. This is for the best, Brandon, Chen added. You've done your part. Let the professionals scale the business. I closed the folder with a soft thud. I looked around the room. The investor reps were looking at their watches. Marcus was still staring at his phone. Samantha was watching me, waiting for the inevitable outburst. Instead, I smiled. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it into the center of the table. What's this? Samantha asked, her hand hesitating before she picked it up. That is my formal demand for immediate, one-time cash liquidation of my technical shares, I said. The room went instantly quiet. Chen's head snapped up. Are you out of your mind? You can't liquidate pre-IPO shares. There's a standard 180-day lockup period for all insiders. For common stock, yes, I replied calmly. But if you look at the original incorporation charter we signed 3 years ago, the one drafted under California law before we restructured in Delaware, there is a specific acceleration clause. It states that if the co-founder's core technical responsibilities are altered or terminated by a board vote prior to a public offering, the co-founder has the right to demand immediate redemption of their technical equity at the current fair market value, paid in cash, within 48 hours. Samantha's face drained of color. She looked at Julian, then at Marcus. Marcus, is this real? Marcus finally looked up, his face pale. He cleared his throat. There is an active technical acceleration covenant in the original seed charter. We never formally superseded it in the Series B bylaws because we didn't think we'd ever terminate Brandon's technical control. How much is he asking for? Chen demanded, leaning over Samantha's shoulder to look at the paper. Based on our current IPO target price, I said, 31.2% of Nexus Technologies is worth exactly $936 million. I'll take a discount for cash. Let's call it $700 million. Wire it to my account by 5 o'clock tomorrow, or I file the injunction. This is extortion. Julian stood up, slamming his hand on the table. You file an injunction now, and the underwriters will pull the listing by midnight. The SEC will freeze the IPO. You'll destroy the company. Then you'd better start writing a check, Julian, I said, standing up. Because if that money isn't in my account, I'm not just filing for the valuation liquidation. I'm sending a package to the SEC's Enforcement Division. It contains 3 years of Marcus's double ledger accounting, the inflated R&D expenses Samantha authorized last winter, and the offshore licensing transfers to your shell company in the Caymans. Samantha gasped, her hands shaking as she dropped the paper. Brandon, you wouldn't. Try me, I said. You wanted the professionals to run the business, Sam. Welcome to the big leagues. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the door wide open. My phone screen lit up the dark interior of my parked Mustang. 5:47 p.m. The deadline had passed 47 minutes ago. I sat in the parking lot of a diner off the 101, watching the traffic crawl towards Silicon Valley. The engine idled, a low hum that kept me grounded. A sharp tap on my passenger side window made me reach for the door lock. It was Julian. He was standing in the cold bay fog, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his overcoat. He didn't look like the triumphant Wall Street savior anymore. He looked like a man who had spent the last 3 hours arguing with lawyers. I rolled the window down 2 inches. You're late. Unlock the door, Brandon, Julian said, his breath fogging in the air. Let's talk like adults. We aren't adults, Julian. We're counterparties. Say what you have to say from there. Julian let out a dry, frustrated breath, leaning against the door frame. The board is offering a compromise. You keep your 31.2% of the common stock. We draft a non-interference agreement. You step away from operations, but we bypass the 5-year vesting schedule. It vests immediately at the IPO price. On top of that, Nexus will write you a check for $50 million tomorrow morning as a consulting severance. $50 million, I repeated. And what about the Aegis patent pool? The company retains the exclusive, perpetual license, Julian said, his eyes narrowing. Obviously, but we'll keep your name on the patent filings. You get the prestige, the title of founder on the legacy site, and $50 million in cash. Plus, your shares will be worth over $900 million once the lockup expires. It's a billion-dollar exit, Brandon. Don't be a fool. I looked at him, letting the silence stretch until he shifted his weight uncomfortably. You really don't get it, do you? I said. You think this is a negotiation. Aegis isn't just code, Julian. It's a dynamic compiler. The moment I pull my proprietary decryption keys from the repository, the next build will fail. Your developers won't even be able to patch a bug, let alone scale the architecture. You're trying to buy a Ferrari without the ignition key for $50 million. Without the company, your key is worthless, Julian hissed, dropping the polite facade. You think another VC is going to touch you after you blow up a $3 billion IPO? You'll be radioactive, Brandon. You'll be the guy who killed his own child out of spite. Sign the compromise, or we'll tie you up in litigation so deep you won't be able to afford a cup of coffee by next winter. I'll take my chances, I said, and rolled the window back up. I shifted into drive and pulled out of the lot, leaving him standing under the flickering neon sign of the diner. By 8:15 p.m., I was back in my temporary apartment, my laptop open on the kitchen counter. An email from the Nexus legal department had just hit my inbox. Subject: cease and desist / breach of fiduciary duty. The document was 10 pages of aggressive legal threats. It argued that under Delaware corporate law, any attempt by a minority shareholder to disrupt a registered public offering constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. It warned that the company would seek triple damages, potentially billions, if I made any disclosures to the SEC or the underwriters. I didn't call our corporate counsel. Instead, I forwarded the email to Arthur Vance, no relation to Samantha, a senior partner at a white shoe firm in San Francisco who specialized in federal securities litigation. I attached the original, unredacted California seed charter from my flash drive. 10 minutes later, Arthur called me. Brandon, I reviewed the files, and the Delaware restructuring didn't legally supersede the California acceleration covenant, Arthur said, his voice crisp and confident. They missed a filing window on the merger transition. Under California corporate code, your demand for immediate redemption is entirely valid. If they don't pay, you have the right to file an emergency injunction in the Northern District of California. What does that do to the listing? It freezes it, Arthur said flatly. The SEC cannot allow a registration statement to go active while there is an active, unresolved ownership dispute over the core intellectual property. If we file this tomorrow morning at 8, the underwriters will yank the listing by 9. The IPO is dead. File it, I said. Are you sure, Brandon? There's no coming back from this. Once the petition is on the public docket, Nexus's valuation will crater. They made their choice when they locked me out of the room. Arthur, file the petition. I hung up and stared at the screen. At 11:34 p.m., my phone rang again. The caller ID showed Samantha's personal number. I hesitated, then answered. Brandon? Her voice was shaking. The cold, corporate poise she had maintained in the boardroom was completely gone. Please tell me you didn't instruct your lawyer to file that injunction. It's already signed, Sam. It goes on the federal docket at 8 tomorrow morning. You can't do this, she sobbed, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine panic in her voice. We have over 200 employees, Brandon. People who moved their families here, people who worked 80-hour weeks because they believed in what we were building. If the IPO fails, the Series B debt covenants kick in. We'll be insolvent in 30 days. You should have thought about those 200 employees before you tried to steal my life's work to fund Julian's second chance, I said, my voice dead and level. Julian has nothing to do with this. She cried. He was ruined, Brandon. His ex-wife's family took everything in the divorce. He had no money, no reputation left on Wall Street. I had to help him. I couldn't just watch him drown. So you decided to drown me instead. You don't understand. She pleaded, her voice cracking. You're a genius, Brandon. You can always write another program. You can start another company tomorrow and VCs will throw money at you. But Julian, this was his only way back. I did what I had to do for the man I love. Please, for the sake of everything we were, just give us 6 months. Let the IPO clear, and I swear I will pay you every cent of your share. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the desperate breathing of the woman I had spent 3 years protecting. I felt a profound, heavy emptiness. 3 years, Sam, I said quietly, and you never once looked at me as a partner. I was just the engine that built your ladder. Brandon, please. Goodbye, Samantha, I said, and ended the call. I powered down the phone and went to bed. The grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental was a sea of black ties, silk dresses, and the deafening roar of self-congratulation. By 7:30 p.m., the pre-IPO gala was in full swing. Pyramids of crystal champagne flutes caught the glare of the overhead chandeliers, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and prime rib. This was the victory lap. Wall Street analysts, tech journalists, and early-stage investors rubbed shoulders, all of them eager to toast to the next $3 billion unicorn. I walked in through the heavy double doors wearing the same black suit I had bought for my wedding a year ago. It was slightly loose on me now. I didn't grab a drink from the passing trays. I just stood near the edge of the room, watching. Samantha was the center of gravity. She was wearing an off-the-shoulder emerald gown that looked like a custom Valentino, her neck draped in diamonds. She held a glass of champagne, her laughter echoing lightly over the chamber music. Next to her stood Julian, looking smug in a slim-cut tuxedo, his hand resting comfortably on the small of her back. As her eyes scanned the crowd, they landed on me. The laughter died on her lips. She whispered something to Julian, who glanced my way with a smirk, and then she began walking toward me. The clicking of her heels on the marble floor was sharp, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of hesitation. You showed up, she said, stopping 2 feet away. Her voice was low, masked by the ambient chatter of the crowd. I didn't think you had the stomach for it. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Sam, I said. She reached into her small clutch purse, pulled out a thick, white envelope embossed with the gold Nexus logo, and pressed it against my chest. This is the official board resolution, she said, her green eyes cold as ice. Effective immediately, your employment with Nexus Technologies is terminated. You are no longer Chief Technical Advisor. You have no operational authority, and your access to the secure servers has been permanently revoked. I took the envelope, the heavy stock of the paper textured and cold. And the other document? Samantha didn't blink. She reached back into her bag and pulled out a second folder, navy blue with a silver seal. The divorce petition, signed and notarized on my end. I want you out of my house by Monday, Brandon. I'm not playing games with you anymore. You really think you've won? I murmured, sliding the folders under my arm. I didn't win, Brandon. I just grew up, she said, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I spent 3 years playing the supportive wife while you stared at code. I built the relationships that made us. And yes, I never stopped loving Julian. I kept his picture in my desk drawer the entire time we were married. This IPO is my future. His future. We're taking Nexus to the moon, and you're just baggage we're leaving on the tarmac. Suddenly, the chamber music cut out. The heavy, triumphant brass of a corporate anthem began to play through the ballroom's sound system, the signal that the ceremonial pre-listing speeches were about to begin. Samantha turned her back on me, adjusting her posture as the crowd began to gravitate toward the stage at the front of the room. Samantha, I called out. She paused, looking back over her shoulder with an irritated sigh. What, Brandon? If you're going to beg, do it in private. You forgot one thing, I said, reaching into my inner jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out a heavy, matte black USB drive and held it up between us. Samantha's brow furrowed. What is that? A backup of your code? We already copied the repository, Brandon. Your keys are obsolete. This isn't a code backup, Sam, I said, walking past her toward the AV booth at the back of the ballroom. Julian saw me moving and intercepted me near the soundboard, his chest puffed out under his tuxedo. "Carter, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get out of here before I have security throw you onto the street." "Get out of my way, Julian," I said, my voice dead and quiet. "Make me," he sneered, reaching for my shoulder. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my fists. I simply stepped hard into his space, shoved him back with my forearm, and bypassed him before he could find his footing. I slid into the AV booth, shutting the door behind me. The young technician running the boards looked up in shock as I plugged my drive directly into the main media server. "Hey, man, you can't be in here," the tech started. "Press play on the secondary input," I said, pointing at his screen. "Or you can explain to the SEC tomorrow why you helped cover up securities fraud." The kid went pale. He looked at the system, then at the sheer determination in my eyes, and hit the override key. The ballroom's massive, three-story projection screens, which had been displaying the Nexus logo and a live countdown to the NASDAQ opening bell, suddenly went pitch black. The chatter in the room instantly died. Hundreds of faces turned toward the screens. Then, the audio kicked in. It wasn't music. It was a recorded conversation, clear and resonant through the high-end sound system. "Julian, are you sure we can handle Brandon? He wrote the entire architecture." Samantha's voice echoed through the hall, loud, crisp, and unmistakable. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. On screen, a high-definition video began to play. The timestamp in the corner read 7 days ago. The location was Samantha's private office. The camera angle was static, captured from the smart security hub I had installed on her bookshelf. In the video, Samantha was sitting at her desk, and Julian was standing behind her, his hands massaging her shoulders. "Don't worry about the tech geek, babe," Julian's voice boomed through the speakers. "He's soft. We offer him some honorary title, throw $50 million in funny money at him, and he'll sign whatever we put in front of him. He's too stupid to realize we're diluting him out of the company anyway. I just want him gone," Video Samantha said, leaning back into his touch with a look of pure adoration she had never once given me. 3 years of pretending to care about his algorithms. I swear, looking at him every morning made me sick. If we didn't need his patents to clear the Series B, I would have locked him out a year ago. In the ballroom, the silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. On the video, Julian laughed, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Once the bell rings tomorrow, the underwriters lock in the valuation. Then, we start routing the RD budget through our offshore holdings in Grand Cayman. By the time the board realizes the tech is stagnant, we'll have shorted the stock through our proxy funds and walked away with $300 million each. To us," Video Samantha said, clinking her glass against his. "And to leaving Brandon with nothing." The screen went black. For 3 seconds, the ballroom was a vacuum. Then, absolute chaos erupted. Phones were pulled out. Camera flashes began going off like strobe lights. The media reporters at the front of the room began shouting questions, their recorders raised. Julian burst into the AV booth, his face purple, his eyes bulging. "You son of a bitch. Shut it off. Shut it off now." He lunged for the server, but I stepped in front of him, my shoulder slamming into his chest and pinning him against the wall. "It's already over, Julian," I whispered in his ear. The live feed just went to the SEC's tip portal and the lead underwriter's personal inbox. The IPO is dead. I walked out of the booth, stepping back into the ballroom. Samantha was standing in the center of the room. The crowd had backed away from her, leaving her in a 10-foot circle of isolation. The emerald gown and the diamonds didn't look regal anymore. They looked like a costume. Her face was entirely white, her lips trembling as she stared at me. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice cracking as the press closed in around her. "Brandon, please." I didn't answer. I adjusted my jacket, turned my back on the flashing cameras, and walked out into the cool San Francisco night. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the financial world was in a state of absolute meltdown. The SEC had issued an emergency freeze on the Nexus Technologies registration statement 30 minutes before the opening bell. NASDAQ indefinitely suspended the listing. The underwriting syndicate, led by Goldman Sachs, formally withdrew from the deal, citing material non-disclosure and potential securities fraud. I sat in the temporary office space I'd rented in a brick-and-beam building in Soma. The room had nothing but a long folding table for chairs and my laptop. The air smelled of stale coffee and whiteboard markers. The door opened, and Samantha walked in. She wasn't wearing the custom Valentino or the Tiffany diamonds. She was in a faded gray hoodie, oversized sunglasses, and worn-out jeans, the kind of clothes she used to wear when we lived on instant ramen in the South San Francisco garage. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face hollowed out by a sleepless night of panic. "Brandon," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't wait for an invite. She walked to the table and gripped the edge of it, her knuckles white. "You have to call them off." "Call who off, Sam?" I didn't look up from my screen. My hands kept moving across the keyboard, committing a fresh build of the newly isolated Aegis codebase. "The SEC, the state prosecutors, your attorneys," she pleaded, stepping closer. "The press is camped outside my apartment. The board is suing me for breach of duty." The Series B lenders called in their notes. "If you don't issue a statement saying the video was an AI-generated deepfake, saying it was a stunt or a technical test, I'm going to prison, Brandon. The company is going to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy by Monday." I stopped typing and looked up, meeting her eyes. "You should have thought about Chapter 7 when you and Julian were planning to short your own stock and strip the RD budget." "That was Julian's idea," she cried, tears spilling over the edges of her sunglasses. She pulled them off, throwing them onto the table. "He pressured me. He told me it was the only way to protect our personal wealth if the market turned. I was stupid, Brandon. I was desperate to keep him. But I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. You told him that looking at me every morning made you sick, Sam. That was on the tape. Was that Julian's idea too?" She flinched as if I'd hit her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She slumped into one of the cheap folding chairs, her head in her hands, sobbing. "I was wrong," she choked out. "I was so incredibly wrong. You were the only person who actually cared about me. Julian." The moment the video played last night, he packed his bags. He tried to wire $4 million from the operating account to an offshore entity, but Marcus blocked the transfer. "He's a parasite, Brandon. I see it now." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, her voice cracking with desperation. "We can fix this. We still own the core entity. If we fire Julian, if we tell the investors you're back in control as CEO, we can restructure. We can get back together. We can be what we were, Brandon. Like the old days." I slowly pulled my hand back, out of her reach. "The old days were a lie, Sam," I said, my voice dead and steady. "You didn't love me then, and you don't love me now. You loved the $3 billion valuation I built for you. And that valuation is gone. It's ashes. You're really going to let it die?" she asked, her voice dropping to a hollow, desperate whisper. "Everything we built? I'm letting your version of it die," I said, closing my laptop. "Aegis belongs to me. The California courts just granted our emergency motion for ownership confirmation based on the original seed charter. Nexus has no legal right to deploy, sell, or license my compiler. From this moment on, you are running an empty shell." She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and realization. "You planned this. You didn't just blow up the IPO. You took the foundation." "I took my foundation," I corrected. "You can keep the building. Now, get out of my office, Sam. I have a 9 o'clock meeting." She stood up slowly, her body trembling. She looked at me for a long, silent moment, waiting for a hint of the soft, compliant husband she had manipulated for 3 years. But she found nothing. She turned and walked out, her footsteps heavy and dragging on the concrete floor. At 9 a.m. sharp, the door opened again. Donald Warren walked in, followed by 2 senior partners from Sequoia. He didn't look like a man who had almost lost $50 million the night before. He looked like a hunter who had just found a better target. He glanced around the empty, unadorned room and smiled. "No mahogany tables today, Brandon?" Donald asked, pulling out a folding chair and sitting down. "Just the code, Donald," I said. "Good. That's what I'm here for," Donald said, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I spent the night with our legal team and our technical analysts. We reviewed the filing you submitted to the Northern District. Your intellectual property claim is ironclad. Samantha and her board have zero leverage." "I know," I said. "The Nexus brand is toxic, but the Aegis engine is still the holy grail of distributed computing," Donald continued, his eyes sharp and calculating. "We want to back you, Brandon. Not Nexus. You. We're prepared to lead a $500 million Series A for your new entity. Let's call it Aegis Tech. We'll bring in Andreessen and Founders Fund to co-lead. We value the new company at $5 billion out of the gate. I looked at him. I have two conditions, Donald. No negotiation. Let's hear them. First, I want absolute voting control. I hold 60% of the super voting shares permanently. No proxy transfers, no board overrides. Donald nodded slowly. Standard for founder-led plays of this scale. Agreed. What's the second? No financial engineering. No shell companies. No offshore tax haven licensing. No shortcuts to inflate the books for a quick exit. We build real tech, we sell real licenses, and we grow organically. If you want a narrative to pump on Wall Street, find another stock. Donald let out a sharp, appreciative laugh and stood up, extending his hand. Brandon, after the circus I watched last night, a clean, boring tech company run by a guy who actually knows how to compile a program sounds like heaven. Let's build an empire. I shook his hand. Let's. Nexus Technologies filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on a rainy Tuesday morning. Within 3 weeks, the assets were liquidated for pennies on the dollar. The glossy signage was stripped from the top of the downtown tower, leaving behind only faint gray outlines of the letters on the concrete. Samantha Vance and Julian Reed were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of securities fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Meanwhile, Aegis Tech had taken over the industry. We closed our Series A, hired 60 of the best engineers from the wreckage of Nexus, and scaled our enterprise compiler to over 500 corporate clients. On our opening day on NASDAQ, the ticker symbol Aegis surged 82%. By the closing bell, our market cap sat at $112 billion. I was officially a billionaire, but my life hadn't changed. I still drove the Mustang. I still worked 12-hour days in a plain office in Soma. I still wrote code. At 10:45 p.m. on a Thursday, I was staring at a memory allocation log when my office door opened. My assistant had gone home hours ago. I looked up. Julian Reed was standing in the doorway. He looked like a ghost. He had lost 20 pounds. His tailored Tom Ford suit was replaced by a cheap, wrinkled blazer from a department store rack, and his silver Audemars Piguet was gone, replaced by a bare wrist with a pale band of untanned skin. Julian, I said, leaning back in my chair. You're trespassing. The front security door was unlocked, Julian said, his voice hoarse. He didn't step into the room. He just gripped the doorframe as if his legs couldn't fully support him. I needed to see you, Brandon. I don't have anything for you, Julian. The federal prosecutors have all my statements. If you're looking for character references, you're in the wrong place. I'm not here about the trial, Julian said, taking a step forward. His eyes were bloodshot, his face mapped with desperation. The lawyers say I'm looking at 5 to 7 years in a medium security facility. I've spent every dollar I had on retainer fees. My bank accounts are frozen. My apartment in Pacific Heights is being foreclosed on next week. I'm broke, Brandon. Literally broke. And Samantha left me, he whispered, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping his throat. The minute the federal marshals showed up, she blamed everything on me. She told the feds I coerced her, that I was the mastermind. She hates me. She said I ruined her life. He looked up, his eyes wide and pleading. I just need a job, Brandon. Anything. I'll work in your mailroom. I'll sweep the floors. I'll drive your shuttle. Just give me a paycheck so I can pay my rent before they lock me up. I looked at him, remembering the man who had slammed his hand on the mahogany table and called me a tech geek who didn't understand how the world worked. Julian, I said quietly. Yeah? Yes, Brandon, anything. Just name it. Do you know what I hate most in this industry? He blinked, confused. What? I don't hate ruthless people. And I don't hate incompetent people, I said, standing up and shutting my laptop. I hate people who are both. You're a parasite who thought he was a predator. You tried to steal a $3 billion company with a handful of cheap buzzwords and a bad narrative. You don't belong in my mailroom. You don't even belong in my building. You don't have the talent to work here, and you don't have the spine. Julian's face went entirely slack. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Get out of my office, I said. He stood there for 5 seconds, realized I wasn't going to say another word, and then slowly turned around. I listened to his heavy, dragging footsteps echo down the empty hallway until the elevator doors dinged and closed. I sat back down, but before I could open my laptop, my personal phone rang. It was Marcus Zhao. Brandon, Marcus said. His voice was trembling. Have you seen the news? No, I've been in the compiler log all night. What happened? It's Samantha, Marcus said, his breath hitching. The police just found her in her rental in Oakland. She took an entire bottle of sleeping pills, Brandon. She left a note. By the time the paramedics got there, she was already gone. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I stared at the blank screen of my monitor. Brandon, you there? Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm here. I'm sorry, man. I know. I know how things ended, but 3 years ago, we were all in that garage together. It shouldn't have ended like this. No, I said. It shouldn't have. I hung up. I grabbed my jacket, walked out of the building, and drove down to the Presidio. I parked near the water, stepping out into the cold, biting wind of the San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge loomed in the fog, its orange spans fading into the gray mist. I stood by the railing, looking down at the black, churning water. I thought about Samantha 3 years ago, sitting in the Blue Bottle coffee shop, telling me we were going to change the world. I thought about the night we got married, eating burgers on the floor of our first office, promising we'd run this race together. She had wanted to climb so badly that she forgot who built the ladder. And in the end, the heights had swallowed her whole. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a local number. I answered it. Brandon Carter? A young, sharp voice asked. Speaking. Hi, Brandon. My name is Maya Lin. I'm a senior tech reporter with the Wall Street Journal. We're running a cover story on the fall of Nexus and the rise of Aegis Tech. We wanted to get a quote from you for the Monday edition. I don't do profile pieces, Maya. Just one question. Then, she pressed. You've gone from being pushed out of your own company to running a $100 billion empire in less than 6 months. You've beaten the VCs, the Wall Street short sellers, and the people who betrayed you. What's next for Brandon Carter? I looked out at the dark horizon, where the lights of a cargo ship were slowly cutting through the fog, moving toward the open ocean. Next, I said, is the code. The code? She asked, waiting for elaboration. What does that mean? It means the narrative is over, I said, and hung up. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, walked back to my car, and drove into the night.